Hi, I'm Shirley. I'm 32 years old, and I work as a marketing coordinator for a mid-sized tech company here in Phoenix, Arizona. If someone had told me 3 years ago that I'd be sitting here sharing this story with you, I would have laughed. Not because it's funny, trust me, nothing about what I'm about to tell you is amusing, but because I never imagined my life could take such a dramatic turn. This is a story about deception, family betrayal, and discovering that sometimes the people closest to you are capable of things you never thought possible. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I've always been the responsible one in my family. While my younger sister Rachel was out partying through college and bouncing from job to job, I was building my career, saving money, and being careful with my finances. I pride myself on having excellent credit. It's something I've worked hard to maintain since I got my first credit card at 18. Every payment on time, never maxing out cards, keeping my utilization low. My credit score was something I monitored religiously, checking it every few months like clockwork. That's what makes this story so particularly devastating. All those years of careful financial planning, of being responsible and trustworthy, meant nothing when someone you love decides to destroy it all for their own gain. It started on what should have been a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning in March. I remember it was unseasonably warm for Phoenix that early in the year, and I was sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop, going through my morning routine of checking emails and reviewing my schedule for the day. I had recently decided to apply for a mortgage. My lease was up in a few months, and with interest rates being decent, I figured it was time to stop throwing money away on rent and actually invest in property. My loan officer, Jennifer Martinez from Desert Valley Credit Union, had recommended I pull my full credit report before we moved forward with the mortgage application. Just to make sure everything looks clean, she had said during our initial meeting. Sometimes there are small errors that can affect your rate, and it's better to catch them early. So that Tuesday morning, I logged into one of the major credit reporting websites and requested my complete report from all three bureaus. I expected to see exactly what I always saw: my student loan that I'd been diligently paying down, my two credit cards with low balances that I paid off every month, and my car loan that had about 8 months left on it. Clean, simple, responsible. What I saw instead made my coffee mug slip from my hands and crash onto the floor. There were credit cards I had never opened. Not one, not two, but 5 different credit cards from various banks and retailers, all showing significant balances. The oldest one opened nearly 2 years ago. As I scrolled through the report, my heart started pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Store cards from major retailers, a high-limit Visa from a bank I'd never even set foot in, and what appeared to be some kind of premium rewards card with a credit limit higher than my annual salary. The total debt showing on these fraudulent accounts was staggering, over $47,000. But what really made my stomach drop wasn't just the amount. It was seeing my own name, my social security number, my date of birth, and most chilling of all, my current address listed on every single account. This wasn't some random identity thief who had gotten hold of my information. This was someone who knew me intimately. I immediately started taking screenshots of everything, my hands shaking as I navigated through page after page of financial destruction. Each account showed the same pattern. They'd been opened with minimum payments made for the first few months, then nothing. Every single card was now showing as severely delinquent, with late fees and interest charges piling up month after month. The addresses listed for the card deliveries painted an even more disturbing picture. Some cards had been sent to my address, cards I had never received. Others had been sent to addresses I didn't recognize, scattered across different parts of Phoenix and even one in Tempe. But there was one address that appeared multiple times, an address that made my blood run cold. 2847 Cactus Ridge Drive, Apartment 204. That was Rachel's apartment complex. I knew that address by heart because I had been there countless times over the past few years. I spent the next 3 hours on the phone with each credit card company, explaining that I had never opened these accounts and demanding details about the applications.
The representatives were surprisingly helpful once I explained the situation, though they all told me the same thing. I would need to file police reports and formal fraud disputes to get the accounts removed from my credit. But it was during my call to the fourth credit card company, a regional bank called Southwest Financial, that I got the details that confirmed my worst suspicions. The customer service representative, after putting me on hold for what felt like forever, came back with information about the account opening. Ma'am, I can see here that when this account was opened 18 months ago, the application was submitted in person at our Scottsdale branch location. The applicant provided a driver's license and social security card as identification. That's impossible, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I've never been to that branch. I don't even bank with you. Well, I can also see that there's a secondary contact phone number on file. Would you like me to verify that number?
When she read me the number, I felt like the world tilted off its axis. It was Rachel's cell phone number, the same number I had called just a few days earlier to check on her after she'd texted me saying she was feeling sick. I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen, surrounded by printed credit reports and handwritten notes, trying to process what I had discovered. My sister, my baby sister, who I had helped through college, who had lived with me for 3 months when she couldn't make rent, who had been in my wedding as maid of honor, had been systematically destroying my credit for nearly 2 years. The more I thought about it, the more the pieces started falling into place. Rachel had always been financially irresponsible, but over the past couple of years, her spending seemed to have gotten worse. She was constantly showing up with new clothes, expensive handbags, the latest iPhone models. When I'd ask her about it, she'd laugh it off and say she'd gotten a good deal or found something on sale. I'd assumed she was maybe using credit cards irresponsibly, but I never imagined she was using my credit cards. There had been other signs too, signs I had overlooked or explained away. About a year ago, I started getting occasional calls from debt collectors looking for someone with my name, but asking about accounts I didn't recognize. I always assumed it was a case of mistaken identity. After all, Shirley Peterson isn't exactly an uncommon name. I'd politely tell them they had the wrong person and hang up. Then there were the pieces of mail that never arrived. A few times over the past year, I had been expecting important financial documents or statements that simply never showed up. I chalked it up to postal service issues and always followed up online or by phone. Now I was wondering if those missing pieces of mail had been credit card statements and bills that Rachel had intercepted. The most chilling realization was how calculated it all seemed. The addresses where cards were delivered, the timing of the account openings, even the types of cards she had chosen, high-limit cards that wouldn't trigger immediate attention, store cards that might get lost in the shuffle of regular retail promotions. This wasn't an impulsive decision or a moment of desperation. This was a carefully planned scheme that had been going on for years. As the afternoon wore on and I continued calling financial institutions and taking notes, a crushing sense of betrayal settled over me. This wasn't just about money or credit scores. Rachel had violated something fundamental about our relationship. She had looked me in the eye countless times over the past 2 years, had sat at my dinner table, had celebrated holidays with our family, all while carrying on this elaborate deception. But beyond the betrayal, what really terrified me was realizing how much damage had already been done. My credit score had dropped by over 200 points. The mortgage I had been so excited about was now completely out of reach. Worse yet, some of these delinquent accounts were showing as being in collections, which meant the damage to my credit could last for years, even after everything was resolved. By evening, I had filled an entire legal pad with notes, account numbers, phone numbers, and dates. I had printed out every page of all 3 credit reports and organized them into folders. I felt like I was building a case, which I suppose I was. But I still hadn't figured out the hardest part. How do you confront someone you love with evidence of such a massive betrayal? I kept thinking about Rachel, trying to reconcile the sister I knew with the person who could do something this devastating. Rachel had always been the free spirit of the family, the one who lived in the moment and didn't worry too much about consequences. But this went so far beyond being carefree or irresponsible.
This was calculated fraud that had been going on for years. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept seeing those credit reports, the long list of accounts I had never opened, the thousands of dollars in debt that wasn't mine, but was destroying my financial future. By 4 a.m., I gave up on sleep entirely and made myself a pot of coffee. I had decided that before I confront Rachel, I needed to understand the full scope of what she had done. I started by creating a timeline. Using the account opening dates from my credit reports, I mapped out when each card had been opened and began cross-referencing those dates with my memories of Rachel's life during those periods. The pattern that emerged was both shocking and heartbreaking. The first card was opened in September, 2 years ago. That was right around the time Rachel had started her job at the marketing firm downtown, a job she had been so excited about, calling me almost every day during her first week to tell me about her new coworkers and the office culture. I remembered being so proud of her for finally landing what seemed like a stable position with good benefits. But now, looking back with this new information, I realized that my first job lasted less than 3 months. Rachel had told me she quit because her boss was impossible to work with and the company culture was toxic. At the time, I supported her decision and even lent her money to help with her rent while she looked for something new. The sick irony was that she probably didn't even need my help. She was already using my credit to support herself. The second card had been opened in December of that same year, right before Christmas. I specifically remembered that holiday because Rachel had shown up to our family with expensive gifts for everyone. She gave our parents a high-end coffee maker that I knew cost at least $400, and she bought me a beautiful leather jacket from a boutique downtown. When I asked her, she laughed and said she had been saving up and wanted to spoil the people she loved.
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The third card was opened the following March, and the fourth in July. Each opening seemed to coincide with periods when Rachel was either between jobs or claiming to be financially stressed. I started pulling up old text message conversations between us, and what I found made me feel physically sick. In May, just 2 months after that third card was opened, Rachel had texted me in a panic saying she couldn't make her rent and asking if I could lend her $800. I had transferred the money immediately without question. In August, a month after the fourth card, she had called me crying about an unexpected car repair that was going to cost $1,200. Again, I helped without hesitation. All those times I thought I was being a supportive sister, helping her through temporary rough patches, she had actually been living off my credit while manipulating me into giving her even more money. The level of deception was staggering. But it was when I started looking deeper into the actual purchases that I felt truly violated. I called back some of the credit card companies and requested detailed transaction histories. What I discovered painted a picture of someone living a completely different lifestyle than the one she portrayed to our family. The Southwest Financial card, the one that had been opened in person with my identification, showed hundreds of charges at high-end restaurants across Phoenix and Scottsdale, places I recognized as expensive steakhouses and trendy cocktail bars, where a single meal could easily cost $150 per person. There were charges at luxury spas, premium hair salons, and boutique clothing stores. One particular string of charges caught my attention: a weekend in Las Vegas from 6 months ago that included charges at upscale hotels, expensive restaurants, and what appeared to be significant gambling losses at several casinos. The total for that weekend was over $3,000. I remembered that weekend clearly because Rachel had told me she was going to Vegas with some girlfriends for a budget getaway and had even joked about staying at a cheap hotel off the strip. The retail store cards told their own story of excess. Thousands of dollars spent on clothing, shoes, and accessories from department stores and boutiques. Electronics purchases that included not just one, but multiple tablets, a high-end laptop, and premium headphones. The purchases weren't random or desperate. They painted a picture of someone who was systematically using unlimited credit to maintain a lifestyle completely beyond her means. What made it even more disturbing was discovering that Rachel had been smart enough to make minimum payments on most of the accounts for the first year or so. This wasn't someone who opened the cards and immediately maxed them out. She had been strategic, keeping the accounts in good standing just long enough to establish credit limits and avoid immediate red flags. It was only in the past 6 to 8 months that she had stopped making payments entirely and let the accounts spiral into collections. As I dug deeper into the documentation, I also discovered something that chilled me to the bone. She had been receiving and intercepting my mail. When I called the Postal Service to inquire about mail forwarding or delivery issues at my address, they informed me that there had been a temporary forwarding request filed 8 months ago, redirecting certain pieces of mail from my address to a P.O. box in Tempe. The forwarding request had been submitted with what appeared to be my signature, but when they faxed me a copy of the form, I could see it was Rachel's handwriting attempting to mimic mine. She had specifically requested that mail from financial institutions be forwarded to the P.O. box, which meant she had been intercepting not just credit card statements, but potentially other important financial documents as well. This discovery led me to realize that the damage might extend beyond just the credit cards I had found. If Rachel had access to my mail and my personal information, there was no telling what other accounts she might have opened or what other financial damage she might have caused. I immediately placed fraud alerts with all 3 credit bureaus and requested that they monitor my credit for any new account openings. I also started calling other financial institutions where I had accounts to verify that my information hadn't been compromised. My bank confirmed that there had been no unauthorized access to my checking or savings accounts, but they did inform me that someone had called several months ago inquiring about my account balances and asking about loan products. They hadn't released any information since the caller couldn't provide sufficient verification, but the timing aligned perfectly with Rachel's pattern of account openings. The more I uncovered, the more I realized that Rachel's scheme wasn't just opportunistic, it was sophisticated. She had researched which types of accounts would be easiest to open, which financial institutions had less stringent verification processes, and even which addresses would be most effective for receiving cards without raising suspicion. This wasn't the work of someone making desperate, impulsive decisions. This was fraud committed by someone who had clearly planned and researched their approach. By the second day of my investigation, I had compiled a detailed dossier of Rachel's activities. I had copies of every fraudulent credit report entry, records of all the unauthorized transactions, documentation of the mail forwarding scheme, and even screenshots of social media posts where Rachel was showing off purchases that I now knew had been made with my credit. Looking at those social media posts was particularly painful. There were photos of her at expensive restaurants, wearing clothes and accessories that cost more than I typically spent on myself in a month, smiling and laughing with friends while living a life funded by my destroyed credit. Some of the posts were even tagged with locations that matched the credit card charges I had discovered. But what really broke my heart was finding posts where she had talked about how grateful she was to have such a supportive family, how lucky she felt to have a sister who was always there for her. Reading those posts while surrounded by evidence of her betrayal felt like being stabbed in the chest. I also discovered that the financial damage was continuing to grow daily. Late fees, over-limit charges, and interest were accumulating on all the accounts. Collection agencies were now involved, and some of the debts had been sold to third-party collectors who were adding their own fees and charges. What had started as $47,000 in fraudulent debt was now approaching $52,000, and it was growing every day that the accounts remained unresolved. The psychological impact of discovering the full scope of Rachel's deception was overwhelming. I found myself questioning every interaction we'd had over the past 2 years, wondering what had been genuine and what had been part of her manipulation. Every time she had called to chat, every family dinner where she seemed happy and carefree, every moment when I had felt proud of her or worried about her, all of it was now tainted by the knowledge of what she had been doing behind my back. As I sat surrounded by all this evidence, I realized that confronting Rachel wasn't going to be a simple conversation about a mistake or a moment of poor judgment. This was going to be a confrontation about systematic, long-term fraud that had devastated my financial life and destroyed my trust in someone I loved. The question wasn't whether I should confront her. It was whether our relationship could possibly survive what I was about to reveal I knew. After 3 days of gathering evidence and barely eating or sleeping, I knew I couldn't put off the inevitable any longer. But I also knew that confronting Rachel wasn't something I could approach carelessly. Given the sophisticated nature of her fraud scheme, I realized she had been lying to me with incredible skill for nearly 2 years. If I was going to get the truth out of her, I needed to be strategic about how I approached this conversation. I decided to start by consulting with a lawyer. My neighbor, Janet, worked as a paralegal at a criminal defense firm, and she had mentioned her boss, attorney David Chen, specialized in white-collar crimes, including identity theft. I called his office that Thursday morning and explained my situation. David agreed to see me that same afternoon for a consultation. Sitting in David's office, laying out all my evidence across his conference table, I felt like I was preparing for war rather than confronting my sister. David reviewed everything methodically: the credit reports, the transaction histories, the mail forwarding documentation, even the social media posts I had screenshotted. "This is extensive," he said finally, leaning back in his chair. "Your sister didn't just steal your identity. She created an entirely fraudulent financial life using your credentials. The mail forwarding scheme alone shows premeditation and planning. This isn't impulsive behavior. This is organized financial fraud." David explained that what Rachel had done constituted multiple felonies: identity theft, mail fraud, wire fraud, and potentially money laundering, depending on how she had moved money between accounts. The total amount involved put her crimes in a category that could result in significant jail time if prosecuted. "But here's what you need to understand," David continued. "Once you confront her with this evidence, you're starting a process that might not be reversible. If she admits to the crimes, that admission could be used in court. If she doesn't admit to them and you decide to press charges, your confrontation could be seen as giving her an opportunity to destroy evidence or flee." This was a perspective I hadn't considered. I had been so focused on wanting answers, wanting to understand why Rachel had done this, that I hadn't thought about the legal implications of how I handled the conversation. David recommended that I document everything about our upcoming conversation. He suggested I meet Rachel somewhere public but private enough for an honest conversation, and that I consider recording the conversation if legally permissible in Arizona. He also advised me to have a clear plan for what I wanted to achieve from the conversation. Do you want her to confess so you can understand her motivations? Do you want her to voluntarily help you repair the damage? Or do you primarily want to give her a chance to take responsibility before you involve law enforcement? He asked. I realized I hadn't clearly thought through my goals. Part of me wanted my sister back, wanted this to all be some terrible misunderstanding that we could work through together. But another part of me, the part that had been looking at $52,000 in fraudulent debt and a destroyed credit score, wanted justice. That evening, I called my best friend from college, Maria Santos, who lived in Denver but had known Rachel almost as long as I had. Maria worked as a therapist, and I thought her perspective might help me figure out how to approach such a psychologically complex situation. "Surely, what you're describing sounds like someone with serious issues around money, identity, and possibly addiction," Maria said after I explained everything. "The level of deception and manipulation you're talking about, maintaining this facade for 2 years while systematically destroying your financial life, that's not normal sibling rivalry or even typical financial irresponsibility." Maria helped me understand that Rachel might not respond to the conversation the way I expected. People who are capable of this level of sustained deception often have become very skilled at deflection, blame shifting, and manipulation. You need to be prepared for her to deny everything, even when faced with overwhelming evidence. You also need to be prepared for her to try to make you feel guilty for attacking her or ruining her life. This conversation with Maria was crucial because it helped me realize I needed to approach Rachel not as the sister I thought I knew, but as someone who had demonstrated a capacity for sophisticated deception and manipulation.
I couldn't let my emotions and family loyalty cloud my judgment about what I was dealing with. I spent the next day planning exactly how I would handle the conversation. I decided to invite Rachel to lunch at a restaurant near her apartment, somewhere public enough that she couldn't cause a scene, but quiet enough for us to have a serious conversation. I chose Café Soleil, a small Mediterranean place that had semi-private booths and wasn't usually crowded during lunch hours. But before I called Rachel, I had one more person I needed to talk to: our parents. I had been dreading this conversation because I knew it would devastate them, but I also knew that Rachel might try to contact them immediately after our confrontation, potentially spinning the story to make herself look like the victim. I drove to their house in Glendale that Friday evening. Mom was in the kitchen preparing dinner, and Dad was in his workshop organizing tools. It was such a normal, peaceful scene that I almost couldn't bring myself to shatter it with what I had to tell them. "Mom, Dad, I need to talk to you both about something serious," I said, sitting down at their kitchen table with my folder of evidence. Over the next hour, I walked them through everything I had discovered. I watched their faces change from confusion to disbelief to horror as they processed what Rachel had done. Mom started crying when I showed them the social media posts of Rachel living extravagantly while asking our family for money. Dad became very quiet and pale, his jaw tightening as he read through the credit card statements.
I can't believe this, Mom whispered. How could she do this to you? How could she look us in the eye at family dinners while she was destroying your life? Dad was more direct. This isn't just a mistake or poor judgment, Shirley. This is criminal behavior. She's been living a lie for 2 years, and she's been making fools of all of us. Telling our parents was painful, but their reaction helped validate what I had been feeling. This wasn't something that could be brushed off as a family dispute or a temporary lapse in judgment. This was serious criminal behavior that had real consequences. However, their support came with complications. Mom immediately wanted to call Rachel and get to the bottom of this, while Dad wanted to know if I was planning to press charges. I realized that once I confronted Rachel, the whole family dynamic was going to change permanently. There would be no going back to the way things were before. That night, I finally called Rachel to set up our lunch meeting. I tried to keep my voice normal and casual, but my heart was pounding the entire time. "Hey Rachel, are you free for lunch tomorrow? I was thinking we could try that new place near your apartment." "Sure, that sounds great," she replied, her voice bright and cheerful. "Is everything okay? You sound a little stressed." "Just work stuff," I lied. "I thought it would be nice to catch up. It feels like we haven't had a real conversation in a while." "Absolutely. I've actually been meaning to call you anyway. I have some exciting news to share." Hearing her sound so normal, so cheerful, while I sat surrounded by evidence of her crimes was surreal. I wondered what her exciting news could possibly be. Had she opened more accounts in my name? Was she planning to expand her fraud scheme? Or was she genuinely oblivious to the fact that her entire world was about to come crashing down? After we hung up, I spent the rest of the evening preparing for what I knew would be one of the most difficult conversations of my life. I organized all my evidence into a clear presentation, practiced what I would say, and mentally prepared myself for every possible reaction Rachel might have. I also made some practical preparations. I transferred most of my money from my checking account to a savings account at a different bank, just in case Rachel had somehow gained access to my banking information. I changed all my passwords and security questions on every online account I had. I even went so far as to inform my employer's HR department about the situation, in case Rachel tried to contact them or in case the legal proceedings affected my ability to work. As I lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, I kept thinking about the Rachel I had grown up with. The little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who would braid my hair before school, who cried when I left for college because she didn't want me to go. I tried to reconcile those memories with the evidence of someone who had been systematically destroying my life for 2 years. Tomorrow, I will finally get answers. But I had a sinking feeling that those answers were going to change everything about our family forever. Saturday arrived gray and overcast, matching my mood perfectly. I had barely slept, running through different scenarios of how the conversation might go.
I arrived at Cafe Soleil 30 minutes early, choosing a corner booth that would give us privacy while still being in a public space. I ordered coffee I didn't want and sat there watching the door, my folder of evidence hidden in my purse. Rachel walked in at exactly noon, looking radiant and completely carefree. She was wearing a designer dress I didn't recognize, probably purchased with one of my credit cards, and carrying a handbag that I knew cost more than most people's monthly rent. Seeing her look so happy and put together while knowing what she had done to me felt like a physical blow. "Shirley," she called out, waving enthusiastically as she spotted me. She slid into the booth across from me with a bright smile, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. "You look great," she said, settling in and picking up the menu. "I'm starving. This place looks amazing. Thanks for suggesting it." For a moment, I almost lost my nerve. This was the Rachel I remembered. Warm, charming, genuinely happy to see me. But then I thought about the $52,000 in debt that was destroying my credit, the mortgage I couldn't get, the years of lies, and my resolve hardened. "Rachel, before we order, I need to talk to you about something important," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Her smile faltered slightly. "Oh, okay, that sounds serious. Is everything all right?" I reached into my purse and pulled out one of the credit card statements, placing it on the table between us. It was the Southwest financial statement showing her Las Vegas weekend charges. Rachel glanced down at it, and I watched her face carefully. For just a split second, I saw recognition flash in her eyes before she quickly looked back up at me with a confused expression. "What is this?" she asked, but her voice had changed. The brightness was gone, replaced by something more cautious. "I don't understand. Why are you showing me this?" "The Las Vegas charges from February. Remember when you told me you were going there for a budget weekend with your girlfriends? The dates match exactly." The color drained from Rachel's face, but she maintained her confused expression. "Surely, I don't know what you're implying, but—" "I'm not implying anything," I interrupted, pulling out more documents. "I'm telling you. You opened 5 credit cards in my name over the past 2 years. You've charged over $50,000 on them. You set up mail forwarding to intercept the statements, and you've destroyed my credit while living a lifestyle you couldn't afford." Rachel stared at the documents spread across the table, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. I could see her mind racing, probably trying to figure out how much I knew and what her best response would be. "This is crazy," she said finally, but her voice lacked conviction. "Why would you think I would do something like this? I'm your sister." "Yes, you are my sister. That's what makes this so devastating." I pulled out my phone and showed her one of her Instagram posts from the Vegas trip. "This is you at the Bellagio, wearing a dress that cost $800 according to this credit card statement. The same weekend you told me you were staying at a budget hotel off the Strip." Rachel's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. She sat back in the booth, her hands clenched in her lap, staring at the evidence like it might disappear if she looked at it long enough. "I can explain," she said quietly. "Then explain. I've been trying to understand this for days. Help me understand how my sister could look me in the eye for 2 years while systematically destroying my financial life." What came next wasn't the tearful confession I had expected. Instead, Rachel became defensive, almost angry. "You don't understand the pressure I've been under," she snapped. "You've always had everything together, the stable job, the perfect credit, the savings account. Do you know what it's like being the screw-up sister, always being compared to the perfect Shirley? So you decided to steal my identity? That was your solution? It wasn't supposed to be permanent." Her voice rose, causing other diners to glance in our direction. She lowered it and leaned forward. "I was going through a rough patch. I needed some time to get back on my feet, and I knew you had good credit. I thought I could use it temporarily and pay everything back before you ever found out." "Temporarily? Rachel, the oldest account is from 2 years ago, and you haven't made a payment on any of them in 8 months." "Things got complicated," she said, her voice becoming sullen. "The job market is terrible, and every time I tried to get ahead, something would happen. Car problems, apartment issues, medical bills." I stared at her in disbelief. Medical bills? Rachel, I've seen the credit card statements. You spent $3,000 in Las Vegas in one weekend. You bought a laptop that costs more than most people's monthly salary. This wasn't about medical bills or car repairs. You don't understand what it's like, she repeated, but now she sounded like a petulant child rather than someone taking responsibility for their actions. Then help me understand. Explain to me how buying designer clothes and going to expensive restaurants was supposed to help you get back on your feet. Rachel was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she looked up, there were tears in her eyes, but something about them felt calculated rather than genuine. I was depressed, okay? I know that's not an excuse, but I was in such a dark place. Shopping and going out were the only things that made me feel better. I know it was wrong, but I felt trapped. So you trapped me instead? Do you have any idea what you've done to my life? I can't get a mortgage. My credit score has dropped over 200 points. I'm getting calls from debt collectors every day. And the debt is still growing because you stopped making payments. I'll fix it, she said quickly. I'll call the credit card companies and tell them it was me. I'll take responsibility. How? With what money? You don't have a job, Rachel. And even if you did, how long would it take you to pay back $52,000? That's assuming the debt stops growing, which it won't. For the first time since I had laid out the evidence, Rachel seemed to grasp the true magnitude of what she had done. The number seemed to hit her like a physical blow. 52,000, she whispered. That's what it was as of yesterday. It's growing every day with interest and late fees. Rachel buried her face in her hands. I never meant for it to get this bad. It started with just one card, and then I needed another one to make payments on the first one, and then, you opened 3 more cards and started living like you were wealthy. I kept thinking I would get a better job or win some money or figure out a way to pay it all back before you found out. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did hurt me, and not just financially. Do you know how it feels to discover that someone you love and trust has been lying to you for 2 years? Every conversation we've had, every family dinner, every time I helped you with money, you were living a complete lie. Rachel started crying harder, but I found myself unmoved by her tears. After everything I had discovered, after all the evidence of calculated deception, her emotional display felt manipulative rather than sincere. What happens now? She asked through her tears. I don't know, I said honestly. I've already filed fraud disputes with all the credit card companies. I've placed alerts on my credit reports. I've changed all my passwords and secured my accounts. Are you going to call the police? The question hung in the air between us. I had been dreading this moment, the point where I would have to decide whether to treat Rachel as my sister who had made terrible mistakes or as a criminal who had committed serious crimes against me. I don't know, I repeated. My lawyer says what you've done constitutes multiple felonies: identity theft, mail fraud, wire fraud. You could go to prison. Rachel's face went white. Your lawyer? Did you think I wouldn't get legal advice? Rachel, you've committed serious crimes. This isn't something I can just forgive and forget. Please, she whispered. I know I messed up, but I'm still your sister. We can work this out as a family. Looking at her across the table, I realized that the Rachel I thought I knew might never have existed at all. The person sitting across from me had been capable of sophisticated, long-term deception. She had looked me in the eye countless times while knowing she was destroying my life. And even now, faced with overwhelming evidence, her primary concern seemed to be avoiding consequences rather than making amends. I need time to think, I said finally, gathering up the documents. But Rachel, you need to understand that what you've done can't be undone with an apology. You've committed crimes that have real consequences, and I have to decide how to protect myself going forward. As I stood to leave, Rachel grabbed my arm. Shirley, please, I'll do anything to make this right. Just don't destroy my life over this. I looked down at her, and for a moment, I saw the little sister I had grown up with.
But I also saw someone who had made calculated decisions to betray me for 2 years, and who was now more concerned about protecting herself than acknowledging the damage she had caused. You destroyed your own life, Rachel, and mine too. Now I have to figure out how to rebuild it. I drove home from the restaurant in a daze, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The confrontation had gone exactly as Maria had predicted. Rachel had denied, deflected, tried to manipulate me with tears, and ultimately showed more concern for protecting herself than for the damage she had caused. You destroyed your own life, Rachel, and mine too. Now I have to figure out how to rebuild it. I drove home from the restaurant in a daze, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The confrontation had gone exactly as Maria had predicted. Rachel had denied, deflected, tried to manipulate me with tears, and ultimately showed more concern for protecting herself than for the damage she had caused. But knowing intellectually that this might happen and actually experiencing it were two completely different things. By the time I reached my apartment, my phone was already buzzing with text messages from Rachel. The first few were apologetic, begging me not to do anything drastic, and promising she would find a way to fix everything. But as the afternoon wore on, the tone began to shift. "I can't believe you ambushed me like that in public," read one message. "You could have talked to me privately instead of humiliating me." "This is going to destroy our family," said another. "Is that really what you want?" The final text that evening was the most telling. "I hope you can live with yourself if you send your own sister to prison over money." Each message revealed more about Rachel's mindset. Even after being confronted with overwhelming evidence of her crimes, she was positioning herself as the victim and trying to make me feel guilty for holding her accountable. It was exactly the kind of manipulation that Maria had warned me about. That Sunday, my parents called. They had clearly heard from Rachel, though the version of events she had shared with them was quite different from reality. "Shirley, your sister called us last night," Mom said, her voice tight with worry. "She said you're accusing her of some kind of financial fraud? This can't be true, can it?" I spent an hour on the phone with them, walking through the evidence again and explaining exactly what happened during our confrontation. I could hear the disappointment and heartbreak in their voices as they realized that Rachel had lied to them as well. "She told us you had misunderstood some paperwork," Dad said quietly. "She made it sound like you were overreacting to a simple mistake." "Dad, I showed her credit card statements with her Vegas charges on them. I showed her Instagram posts from the same trip. There's no misunderstanding here." "We know, sweetheart. We believe you. It's just, how did we not see this? How did she hide something this big for so long?" Mom was devastated. "I keep thinking about all the times she asked us for money, all the times we helped her with rent or car payments. Was any of it real? Or was she just using us while she was living off your credit cards?" Monday morning brought a new complication. I received a call from Detective Sarah Williams from the Phoenix Police Department's white-collar crime unit. Rachel had apparently gone to the police herself, trying to control the narrative. "Miss Peterson, your sister came in yesterday to report that there might be some unauthorized accounts opened in your name. She said she was concerned that someone might be using your identity and wanted to make sure you were aware of the situation." I almost laughed at the audacity of it. Rachel was trying to position herself as the concerned sister who had discovered the fraud, rather than the perpetrator. "Detective Williams, I think there's been some confusion. My sister didn't discover the fraud. She committed it. I have extensive documentation proving that she opened multiple credit cards in my name and has been using them for nearly 2 years." The detective's tone shifted immediately. "I see. Would you be willing to come in and provide that documentation? If what you're saying is accurate, we're looking at serious felony charges." That afternoon, I found myself sitting in a sterile police interview room, spreading out the same evidence I had shown Rachel just 2 days earlier. Detective Williams reviewed everything methodically, taking notes and asking detailed questions about the timeline of events.
This is one of the most comprehensive identity theft cases I've seen, she said finally. Your sister didn't just steal your identity, she created an elaborate financial fraud scheme. The mail forwarding alone shows clear premeditation. Detective Williams explained that the evidence I had gathered was more than sufficient to press charges. The total amount involved meant Rachel would be facing multiple felony counts, each carrying potential prison time. However, she continued, I need you to understand that once we file these charges, there's no going back. This becomes a criminal matter, not a family dispute. Your sister will be arrested, and she'll face the full consequences of her actions. I sat in that interview room for what felt like hours, wrestling with the decision that would change everything. On one hand, Rachel had committed serious crimes that had devastated my financial life. She had shown no genuine remorse and had even tried to manipulate the police by reporting the crimes herself. On the other hand, she was still my sister, and pressing charges would likely destroy any chance of our family ever healing from this. Can I have some time to think about it? I asked. Of course, but don't take too long. The longer we wait, the more opportunity your sister has to potentially destroy evidence or commit additional crimes. That evening, I called David Chen, my lawyer, to discuss the implications of pressing charges versus handling this as a civil matter. Surely, from a legal standpoint, the criminal charges would actually help you with the civil recovery, he explained. If Rachel is convicted, it establishes legal responsibility, which makes it easier to pursue restitution and civil damages. But you're right that it's a decision you can't undo. What if I don't press charges? What are my options then? You'd be relying entirely on the credit card company's fraud investigations and your civil case against Rachel. It's possible, but without criminal conviction, some companies might be less willing to write off the debt completely. You could end up fighting this for years. That night, I made a decision that surprised even myself. I called Rachel. Shirley, she answered on the first ring, her voice hopeful. Does this mean you've reconsidered? I'm calling to give you one last chance to do the right thing, I said. I've been to the police, they have all the evidence, and they're ready to file charges. But I wanted to give you 48 hours to make this right before I give them the go-ahead. What do you mean, make it right? I mean, take full responsibility. Contact every credit card company yourself and admit to the fraud. Provide them with whatever documentation they need to remove the accounts from my credit report. Work out payment plans for the debt. And most importantly, stop lying to our parents and everyone else about what you've done. There was a long pause. And if I do all that, you won't press charges? I didn't say that. I said I'd give you 48 hours to start taking responsibility. What happens after that depends on how serious you are about making amends. This isn't fair, Shirley. You're asking me to destroy my own life. No, Rachel. I'm asking you to take responsibility for the choices you made. You destroyed your own life when you decided to commit fraud for 2 years. I'm giving you a chance to salvage what's left of your integrity. Rachel hung up on me. The next morning, I received a call from Southwest Financial, one of the credit card companies where Rachel had opened accounts. Miss Peterson, we received a very strange call yesterday from someone claiming to be you, trying to add additional charges to the account we have flagged for fraud, the representative told me. My blood ran cold. Even after being confronted, even after knowing I was working with the police, Rachel was still trying to use my credit. That wasn't me, I said firmly. That was the person who committed the fraud, and she's clearly not planning to stop. I immediately called Detective Williams. Detective, I've made my decision. I want to press full charges. My sister just tried to make additional charges on one of the fraudulent accounts. She's not planning to stop or take responsibility. I'll have the arrest warrant prepared immediately, Detective Williams replied. Given that she's now attempted to commit additional fraud after being confronted, this strengthens our case significantly. Wednesday morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls from my parents and a voicemail from Mom that simply said, "Call us immediately." When I called back, Dad answered. "Shirley, the police just arrested Rachel at her apartment. The neighbors called us because they saw her being taken away in handcuffs. What's happening?" The next few hours were a blur of phone calls, family drama, and difficult conversations. My parents were devastated, not just by Rachel's arrest, but by the realization that everything they thought they knew about their younger daughter had been a lie. "She's been in jail before," Mom confessed during one of our conversations. "About 3 years ago, she was arrested for writing bad checks. She made us promise not to tell you because she was so ashamed. We thought it was just a one-time mistake." This revelation hit me like a physical blow. Rachel's identity theft scheme wasn't her first venture into financial fraud. It was part of a pattern that our parents had helped her hide from me. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "She begged us not to," Dad said. "She said she had learned her lesson and would never do anything like that again. We believed her." As I hung up the phone, I realized that Rachel's betrayal went even deeper than I had understood. She hadn't just stolen my identity, she had manipulated our entire family system, using our love and trust against us while continuing to escalate her criminal behavior. The decision to press charges no longer felt difficult, it felt necessary. Rachel's arraignment was scheduled for the following Monday. I had never been inside a criminal courthouse before, and the experience was surreal. Sitting in the gallery, watching my sister, the same person who used to braid my hair and share secrets with me, being led into the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, felt like living in someone else's nightmare. The charges read against Rachel were staggering when listed out in legal terminology. 7 counts of identity theft, 4 counts of mail fraud, 12 counts of wire fraud, and 1 count of attempted credit card fraud for her actions after our confrontation. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Michael Rodriguez, explained that the total amount involved exceeded $52,000, putting the case into a felony category that carried a maximum sentence of 15 years in prison. Rachel's court-appointed attorney, a tired-looking man named James Foster, entered a plea of not guilty and requested bail. The prosecutor argued that Rachel was a flight risk, pointing to her sophisticated fraud scheme and her attempt to continue criminal activity even after being confronted. "Your Honor, the defendant has demonstrated a pattern of escalating financial crimes spanning several years," Rodriguez stated. "She has shown no remorse for her actions and has actively attempted to manipulate law enforcement by filing false reports. We believe she poses a continued threat to financial institutions and to potential victims." The judge set bail at $75,000, an amount I knew Rachel couldn't possibly afford. As she was led back to holding, she looked directly at me for the first time since her arrest. The look she gave me wasn't one of remorse or sadness, it was pure hatred. Our parents attended the arraignment, sitting several rows behind me. They looked aged and broken, as if the events of the past week had taken years off their lives. After the hearing, we stood outside the courthouse in awkward silence. "She wants to see us," Mom said finally. "She's allowed visitors, and she asked specifically for you to come." "I'm not visiting her in jail," I said firmly. "Surely, she's still your sister," Dad pleaded. "Maybe if you talk to her, you could work something out. Maybe she could plea bargain or—" "Dad, she had multiple chances to work something out. She chose to continue committing crimes instead. I'm not enabling her anymore." That conversation marked the beginning of a rift in our family that went far beyond Rachel's crimes. My parents couldn't understand why I wasn't willing to help Rachel navigate the legal system, while I couldn't understand why they still wanted to protect someone who had shown such callous disregard for the people who loved her. Over the next few weeks, I learned more about the legal process than I ever wanted to know. Detective Williams kept me updated on the investigation, which had expanded beyond my case. Rachel's arrest had triggered an audit of her past employment, and they discovered she had been embezzling money from her last 2 jobs as well. "Your sister has been running financial scams for at least 4 years," Detective Williams told me during one of our meetings. "The identity theft against you was just the most sophisticated scheme she'd developed." This revelation was devastating, but also validating. It confirmed that Rachel wasn't someone who had made a desperate mistake. She was someone who had chosen a lifestyle of financial crime and manipulation. The media attention was something I hadn't anticipated. Local news stations picked up the story, fascinated by the angle of sibling identity theft. I refused all interview requests, but seeing our family name in the news added another layer of humiliation to an already difficult situation. 3 weeks after Rachel's arrest, I received an unexpected call from a victim's advocate named Linda Morrison. She explained that several other people had come forward claiming Rachel had defrauded them as well. We have reports from former roommates who say she used their personal information to open utility accounts and cell phone contracts, Linda explained. There's also a former boyfriend who discovered she had been using his credit cards without permission. Your case appears to be part of a much larger pattern. Learning that there were other victims was both heartbreaking and infuriating. How many people had Rachel hurt? How many relationships had she destroyed with her crimes? I agreed to participate in a victim impact group where I met 3 other people whose lives Rachel had damaged. Thomas Chen, no relation to my lawyer, had been Rachel's roommate 2 years earlier. He discovered after she moved out that she had been intercepting his mail and had opened several store credit cards in his name. The fraudulent accounts had damaged his credit so severely that he had been denied an apartment lease and had to move back in with his parents at age 30. Sarah Mitchell had dated Rachel briefly and discovered that Rachel had stolen her credit card information and charged over $8,000 in purchases. When Sarah confronted her, Rachel had claimed it was a misunderstanding and promised to pay everything back. Instead, she had simply disappeared. Jennifer Walsh had worked with Rachel at a marketing firm and had unknowingly provided personal information that Rachel used to commit fraud. Jennifer's identity had been used to take out a personal loan that she only discovered when debt collectors started calling her workplace. Hearing these stories made me realize that Rachel's betrayal of me wasn't personal. It was simply her modus operandi. She targeted people who trusted her, people who cared about her, because their emotional connection made them less likely to suspect her and more likely to give her access to their personal information. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks after Rachel's arrest. During this time, I had to deal with the practical aftermath of her crimes. Working with the credit card companies to remove the fraudulent accounts from my credit report was a bureaucratic nightmare that required dozens of phone calls, police reports, and affidavits. Some companies were cooperative, immediately closing the accounts and removing them from my credit history once they received the police reports. Others required extensive documentation and treated me with suspicion as if I might be trying to get out of legitimate debt. The most frustrating was Pinnacle Credit Services, which had purchased one of Rachel's debts from the original credit card company. They insisted that I was responsible for the debt regardless of the fraud, arguing that I should have monitored my credit more carefully and prevented the identity theft from occurring. "You're essentially telling me it's my fault that my sister committed crimes?" I told their customer service supervisor during one particularly infuriating phone call. "Ma'am, we understand this is a difficult situation, but we have to protect our interests as well. We purchased this debt in good faith, and we need to see a criminal conviction before we can consider writing it off." This conversation highlighted one of the most challenging aspects of identity theft recovery. Even when you can prove you're a victim, some companies still try to hold you responsible for the financial damage. My lawyer, David Chen, filed civil lawsuits against several companies that refused to remove the fraudulent accounts, arguing that their continued reporting of fake debts constituted defamation and was causing ongoing financial harm. These lawsuits would take months or potentially years to resolve, meaning Rachel's crimes would continue to impact my life long after her criminal case was concluded. The emotional toll was perhaps worse than the financial impact. I found myself unable to trust anyone with my personal information, constantly checking my credit reports and feeling paranoid about every financial interaction. Simple things like using my credit card at a restaurant or giving my address for a delivery became sources of anxiety.
I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Patricia Gonzalez, who specialized in helping crime victims process trauma. During our sessions, I began to understand that what Rachel had done to me went far beyond financial fraud. It was a profound violation of trust that had shaken my fundamental beliefs about family and relationships. When someone we love betrays us this deeply, it forces us to question everything we thought we knew about them and about ourselves, Dr. Gonzalez explained. You're not just dealing with financial damage, you're grieving the loss of the sister you thought you had. This perspective helped me understand why I felt such a complex mix of emotions. I was angry about the financial damage, hurt by the betrayal, but also mourning the loss of a relationship that had been central to my identity for 32 years. Meanwhile, Rachel's legal situation continued to deteriorate. Her court-appointed attorney recommended that she accept a plea bargain, but Rachel refused, insisting she was innocent despite overwhelming evidence. Her lawyer informed the court that he couldn't ethically continue representing her if she insisted on maintaining her innocence in the face of documented proof of her crimes. The judge assigned her a new attorney, but the pattern repeated itself. Rachel's refusal to accept responsibility was making her situation worse and prolonging the legal process for everyone involved. During this time, my parents visited Rachel regularly in jail and constantly pressured me to forgive and forget. They seemed unable to accept that Rachel's crimes had consequences that couldn't be wished away with family reconciliation. "She's been in jail for 2 months," Mom said during one of our increasingly tense phone conversations. "Isn't that punishment enough? How long are you going to drag this out?" "I'm not dragging anything out, Mom. Rachel chose to commit crimes, and now she's facing the legal consequences. This isn't about punishment, it's about justice and protecting other potential victims." "She's learned her lesson. She promises she'll never do anything like this again." "She made that same promise after her check fraud arrest 3 years ago, and you kept that from me. How many times are we supposed to believe her promises?" These conversations with my parents were becoming increasingly difficult. They seemed to view Rachel's criminal behavior as a family problem that should be solved privately, while I had come to understand that it was a public safety issue that required legal intervention. The divide in our family was growing wider every day, and I began to realize that pressing charges against Rachel had consequences that extended far beyond her legal troubles. It was fundamentally changing the dynamics of our entire family, forcing everyone to choose sides in a conflict that had no easy resolution. The trial finally began 4 months after Rachel's arrest. By this time, her case had been consolidated with charges from the other victims who had come forward. What started as my personal family tragedy had become a significant criminal case involving multiple victims and hundreds of thousands of dollars in fraudulent activity. Rachel had fired her second court-appointed attorney and was now representing herself, against the advice of everyone involved. This decision proved to be disastrous for her case, but provided some closure for me as a victim, because it meant she would have to personally cross-examine me and the other victims during our testimony. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. Assistant DA Rodriguez presented bank records, credit applications with Rachel's handwriting, surveillance footage from stores where she had used fraudulent cards, and phone records showing her coordination of the mail forwarding scheme. The evidence was so overwhelming that even Rachel's attempts at self-defense came across as desperate deflection rather than legitimate argument. When I took the stand to testify, seeing Rachel across the courtroom was surreal. She looked different, thinner, harder, with an expression I didn't recognize. When she stood up to cross-examine me, she tried to paint me as vindictive and money-obsessed. "Isn't it true that you were jealous of my lifestyle and wanted to punish me for being more successful than you?" she asked during her questioning. "Rachel, your lifestyle was funded by my stolen credit. There was nothing to be jealous of. You were living a lie built on crime. You never tried to help me when I was struggling financially. If you had been a better sister, none of this would have happened." Hearing her try to blame me for her criminal choices in open court was both painful and liberating. It confirmed that the Rachel I had grown up loving was truly gone, replaced by someone who would say anything to avoid responsibility for her actions. The other victims testified as well, and their stories painted a picture of Rachel as a serial manipulator who targeted people who cared about her. Thomas Chen broke down while describing how Rachel's fraud had forced him to move back in with his parents and had destroyed his relationship with his fiancée.
Sarah Mitchell testified about the months of financial stress and the impact on her credit that had prevented her from buying her first home. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They found Rachel guilty on all counts. At sentencing, I was allowed to give a victim impact statement. I had spent weeks writing and rewriting what I wanted to say, trying to find words that could adequately express the scope of damage Rachel had caused. Your Honor, my sister didn't just steal my identity. She stole my sense of security, my trust in family, and my belief that people I love would never intentionally hurt me. The financial damage was significant, but the emotional and psychological damage has been even worse. I've had to rebuild not just my credit, but my entire understanding of who I can trust and how I navigate relationships. Rachel had countless opportunities to stop, to come clean, to seek help. Instead, she chose to escalate her crimes and target more victims. She has shown no genuine remorse, only anger at being caught. I hope this sentence sends a message that financial crimes have real consequences and that family relationships don't provide immunity from accountability. Rachel was sentenced to 6 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution to all victims. The judge was particularly harsh in his comments, noting that Rachel's abuse of family and personal relationships made her crimes especially egregious.
Miss Peterson, you violated the most basic trust that exists between family members, Judge Harrison stated. You systematically exploited people who cared about you, and even when confronted with overwhelming evidence, you showed no remorse or accountability. This sentence reflects not just the financial damage you caused, but the profound breach of trust you committed. As Rachel was led away in handcuffs, she looked at me one final time. There was no sadness, no remorse, just cold anger. In that moment, I finally accepted that the sister I had loved was truly gone. The aftermath of the trial brought unexpected challenges. My parents were devastated by Rachel's sentence and blamed me for sending her to prison. Our relationship became increasingly strained as they struggled to accept that their daughter was a convicted felon. She's going to be labeled as a criminal for the rest of her life, Mom said during one of our last conversations before I made the difficult decision to limit contact with them. Was your money really worth destroying her future? Mom, I didn't destroy her future. She made choices that destroyed her own future. I was trying to protect myself and prevent her from hurting other people. She's still our daughter, and she's still your sister. How can you just write her off? This question haunted me for months. How do you explain to parents that their child has become someone unrecognizable? How do you help them understand that protecting yourself from a family member isn't betrayal, it's survival? Eventually, I made the painful decision to maintain limited contact with my parents. They couldn't accept Rachel's conviction without blame shifting to me, and their continued defense of her behavior was harmful to my healing process. Dr. Gonzalez helped me understand that this boundary was necessary for my emotional well-being. Healing from betrayal requires creating space where you feel safe, she explained. If your family environment continues to minimize Rachel's actions or make you responsible for the consequences, it's not a healthy space for your recovery. Rebuilding my financial life took nearly 2 years. Even with Rachel's conviction, some creditors continued to fight the removal of fraudulent accounts. The civil lawsuits David Chen filed on my behalf eventually resulted in settlements, but the legal fees and time involved were substantial. More challenging was rebuilding my ability to trust. I found myself suspicious of new people, reluctant to share personal information, and constantly vigilant about my financial accounts. Dating became particularly difficult because I couldn't shake the fear that anyone I got close to might try to exploit me the way Rachel had. It was during this difficult period that I met James Rodriguez, a teacher who worked at an elementary school near my office. We met at a coffee shop when he accidentally took my drink order, and his genuine embarrassment and offer to buy me a replacement coffee led to our first conversation. James was patient with my trust issues and my need to keep certain boundaries around personal information.
When I finally told him about Rachel's crimes, he didn't try to minimize what had happened or suggest I should forgive and move on. "That must have been devastating," he said simply. "I can't imagine discovering that someone you loved was capable of that level of deception. How are you doing with all of it now?" His response was exactly what I needed: acknowledgement without judgment, support without pressure to feel differently than I did. Over time, James helped me remember that Rachel's betrayal didn't mean all relationships were dangerous. His consistency and honesty slowly rebuilt my ability to trust, though I remained more cautious than I had been before. 3 years after Rachel's conviction, I received a letter from her in prison. It was the first communication I'd had from her since the trial. The letter was different from anything she had said before. There were no excuses, no blame shifting, no manipulation tactics. "Shirley, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I understand if you throw this letter away without reading it. I've spent 3 years here thinking about what I did, and I finally understand the damage I caused. Not just the financial damage, but the way I destroyed your trust and our family. I was addicted to spending and to the lifestyle the stolen money allowed me to live. But more than that, I was addicted to the feeling of getting away with something. Every time I successfully used your credit or manipulated someone into trusting me, it felt like proof that I was smarter than everyone else. I know now that it wasn't intelligence, it was cruelty. I was hurting people who loved me, and I convinced myself that my wants justified the damage I was causing. There's no excuse for what I did, and I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand what I took from you, and I'm truly sorry." Reading that letter, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Part of me wanted to believe that Rachel had genuinely changed, that prison had helped her develop the capacity for empathy she had seemed to lack during the trial. But another part of me remembered how skilled she had been at manipulation and wondered if this was just another attempt to control the narrative. I showed the letter to Dr. Gonzalez during our session that week. "How does reading this make you feel?" she asked. "Confused," I admitted. "Part of me wants to believe she's changed, but I also remember how convincing she was when she was lying to me for 2 years. How do I know this isn't just another manipulation?" "You don't have to know," Dr. Gonzalez replied. "You don't have to decide whether Rachel has changed or whether her apology is genuine. You only have to decide what's best for your own healing and well-being." I ultimately decided not to respond to Rachel's letter. Whether her remorse was genuine or not, I had built a life without her that was healthy and stable. Reopening that door felt like an unnecessary risk. 5 years after Rachel's conviction, I married James in a small ceremony attended by close friends and his family. My parents chose not to attend because I had maintained my decision to limit contact with them. It was painful, but I had learned that protecting my emotional well-being sometimes requires difficult choices. Today, I work as a victim advocate for identity theft cases, helping other people navigate the complex process of recovering from financial fraud. My experience with Rachel taught me that identity theft by family members is more common than most people realize, and the emotional damage is often worse than the financial impact. I've spoken at conferences about the unique challenges of familial identity theft, and I'm always struck by how many people share similar stories. The betrayal, the family pressure to forgive and forget, the difficulty of pressing charges against someone you love. These experiences are unfortunately common.
Rachel will be eligible for parole next year. I've been notified as a victim and asked whether I want to participate in any parole hearings. I've decided that I don't. Her release or continued imprisonment doesn't change the life I've built or the healing I've accomplished. Sometimes people ask me if I regret pressing charges against Rachel, if I think there might have been another way to handle the situation. My answer is always the same. I regret that Rachel made choices that forced me to choose between protecting myself and protecting her. But given those choices, I don't regret prioritizing my own well-being and the safety of potential future victims. The most important lesson I learned from this experience is that love doesn't require you to accept abuse, even from family members. Setting boundaries with people who hurt you isn't betrayal, it's self-preservation.
And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for someone is to let them face the natural consequences of their actions, even when those consequences are severe. Rachel's crimes taught me that trust is precious and should be given carefully. But they also taught me that one person's betrayal doesn't have to define your capacity to form healthy relationships. It's possible to be both cautious and open, both protective of yourself and willing to love others. My life today bears little resemblance to the life I had before I discovered Rachel's crimes. In many ways, it's better. I'm more self-aware, more intentional about my relationships, and more committed to living authentically. The trauma was devastating, but the growth that came from surviving it has been transformative. If you're dealing with betrayal by someone you love, know that you're not alone. Your feelings are valid, your need to protect yourself is legitimate, and your healing matters. Don't let anyone convince you that family loyalty requires you to accept treatment that damages your well-being. You have the right to build a life that feels safe and authentic, even if that means making difficult decisions about the people you include in it. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.